Maria had always considered herself a practical woman. As a nurse working the grueling morning shift at Phoenix General Hospital, she'd learned to compartmentalize emotion from duty. She'd seen suffering, held the hands of dying patients, and wiped away more tears than she could count. But nothing in her 12 years of nursing had prepared her for what she was about to witness on that scorching Tuesday morning in July. The alarm had screamed at 5:30 a.m., the same as always. Maria dragged herself through her routine, shower, coffee, the usual fight with her teenage daughter about homework, before climbing into her aging Civic. The Phoenix sun was already brutal at 6:45 a.m., promising another day where temperatures would soar past 110 degrees. The city's industrial district looked particularly desolate in the early morning light, with abandoned warehouses casting long shadows across cracked pavement. Maria was mentally preparing for the chaos of the emergency room, running through her patient list from the day before, when something in her peripheral vision made her instincts scream. At first, her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. It looked like a bundle of rags being dragged across the street by the wind, but there was no wind, and the bundle was moving with desperate, deliberate purpose. She slammed on her brakes so hard that her coffee cup flew off the dashboard, spilling across the passenger seat. Her heart hammered against her as she pulled over to the curb, her hands already trembling, because now she could see exactly what it was. A dog. A medium-sized brown dog was pulling himself across 4 lanes of cracked asphalt using only his front legs, while his back legs trailed behind him like dead weight, scraping against the scorching pavement with each agonizing movement. Maria's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. The dog's ribs protruded through matted, filthy fur. Open wounds covered his hindquarters where the rough pavement had worn away skin and fur. A trail of blood marked his path across the street, evidence that he'd been dragging himself for God knows how long. His paws were bleeding, the pads torn and raw from the endless crawling. But it was his eyes that shattered Maria's heart into a million pieces. Despite the obvious agony, despite the dehydration that had sunk in his face, despite what must have been weeks or even months of suffering, those brown eyes held something that took Maria's breath away. Hope. Pure, unwavering hope. The dog kept stopping every few feet to look at the passing cars, searching, pleading, begging for someone, anyone, to finally stop and help him. Maria's nurse training kicked in even as tears streamed down her face. She scanned the area quickly. The industrial district was deserted this early, with only the occasional car passing by, and each one drove right past the suffering animal without even slowing down. How many people had already seen him that morning and chosen to look away? How many times had this poor creature's hope been crushed as car after car passed him by? She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and dialed 911, stumbling out of her car. The heat hit her like a physical wall, and she realized with horror that the pavement must be scalding, probably 130 degrees or more. The dog had been crawling across this burning surface, unable to escape the pain. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm voice answered. There's a dog, Maria choked out, her voice breaking. He's paralyzed, dragging himself across the street. He's dying. Please, you need to send animal control immediately. Industrial Boulevard and 5th Street. Please hurry. As she gave the details, Maria took a cautious step toward the dog, terrified of scaring him away but unable to stay in her car. The dog stopped moving and turned his head toward her. For a moment that seemed to freeze in time, their eyes met. And in that instant, Maria saw something that would haunt her for the rest of her life: gratitude. Pure, overwhelming gratitude that someone had finally stopped. The dog tried to wag his tail. The movement was weak, barely perceptible, but it was there. Despite everything he'd endured, despite the pain that must have been coursing through every nerve in his broken body, he was trying to show her that he was friendly, that he was worth saving, that he deserved love. I see you, baby, Maria whispered, crouching down about 10 feet away from him, afraid that getting too close might spook him into dragging himself away. I see you and I'm not leaving. Help is coming. I promise you help is coming." The dog made a sound, something between a whimper and a cry, and began pulling himself toward her. Each movement made Maria flinch as she watched his useless back legs scrape against the pavement, leaving fresh streaks of blood. He was using every ounce of his remaining strength to close the distance between them, driven by some desperate instinct that this one human who had finally stopped, represented his last chance at survival. "No, baby, don't move, stay there. Please stay there," Maria begged, but the dog kept coming. 10 feet became 8, then 6, then 4. When he finally reached her, he collapsed at her feet, his sides heaving with exhaustion. His tongue lolled out of his mouth, dry and cracked from dehydration. Maria carefully removed her scrub jacket and gently draped it over his torn body, providing some shade from the merciless sun. She didn't dare touch him directly, not knowing if he had internal injuries or broken bones that might cause more pain. But she needed to do something, anything, to ease his suffering. "What's your name, brave boy?" she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "How long have you been out here? How far did you crawl?" The dog looked up at her with those impossibly hopeful eyes, and despite everything, despite the pain and fear and suffering, his tail gave another weak wag. In that moment, Maria made a silent promise to this broken creature at her feet. Whatever it took, whatever it cost, she would make sure he got the chance at life that he so clearly, desperately wanted. She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo, not yet knowing that this single image would soon change hundreds of thousands of lives and spark a movement of compassion that would spread across the entire world. In the distance, she could hear sirens approaching. Help was finally coming for the dog who had refused to give up, the dog who had crawled through hell itself just for the chance that someone might care. Maria stayed crouched beside him, whispering promises and prayers, as the morning sun climbed higher in the desert sky. James had been an animal control officer for the city of Phoenix for 17 years. In that time, he'd seen things that would make most people lose faith in humanity. Dogs chained in scorching heat without water, cats abandoned in sealed boxes, animals beaten, starved, and tortured. He'd learned to build walls around his heart, to do his job efficiently without letting the emotional weight crush him. He had to, or he'd never survive in this line of work. But when his patrol truck rounded the corner onto Industrial Boulevard that Tuesday morning, those carefully constructed walls began to crumble. The scene before him looked like something from a nightmare. A woman, the nurse who'd called 911, was crouched on the blistering pavement, her scrub jacket covering what appeared to be a dog. But as James pulled closer and killed the engine, he realized this wasn't just any injured animal call. The trail of dried blood stretching back down the street told a story of unimaginable suffering. And when he grabbed his equipment and approached, what he saw made his stomach turn. The dog was a skeleton wrapped in matted fur. His back legs lay at unnatural angles, completely lifeless. Open wounds covered his body, some fresh and bleeding, others infected and crawling with flies in the July heat. James had seen malnourished animals before, but this was beyond anything in his experience. This dog should have been dead. By all logic, he should have given up days ago, maybe weeks ago. "How long has he been here?" James asked Maria, his voice rougher than he intended. "I don't know," Maria sobbed. "I found him like this 20 minutes ago. He was crawling across the street. James, he was trying so hard to get somewhere to find help. How many people drove past him?" James didn't answer. He couldn't, because he was asking himself the same question. How many commuters had seen this suffering animal and simply looked away? How many had told themselves it wasn't their problem, that someone else would handle it? He knelt down carefully, speaking in the soft, calm voice he'd perfected over years of working with traumatized animals. "Hey there, buddy. I'm here to help you, okay? We're going to get you out of this heat." The dog's eyes flickered open, and that's when James felt his professional composure shatter completely. Those eyes should have been filled with fear, aggression, or at minimum, wariness. Instead, when the dog saw James reaching for him, he did something that would haunt the officer for the rest of his life. He crawled toward James's outstretched hand. Using his front legs, whimpering with pain, this broken creature somehow found the strength to drag himself closer to the human who'd come to help him. His tail, matted with blood and dirt, attempted to wag. After everything he'd endured, after being abandoned and ignored and left to die, this dog still trusted. He still hoped. He still believed that humans could be good. "Jesus Christ," James whispered, his voice cracking. In 17 years he'd never cried on the job, until now. Tears rolled down his weathered face as he gently, so gently, lifted the dog onto a stretcher. The animal couldn't have weighed more than 30 pounds. "What's your name, warrior? Who did this to you?" Maria followed James to his truck, refusing to leave the dog's side. "I'm coming with you to the vet," she announced, and something in her voice told James not to argue. Some animals had that effect on people. They crawled into your heart and refused to let go. The drive to Phoenix Emergency Veterinary Clinic took 12 minutes. James radioed ahead, giving them the basics: severe trauma, possible spinal injury, critical condition. But no description could have prepared Dr. Sarah Mitchell for what came through her doors. Dr. Mitchell had been a veterinarian for 23 years. She'd graduated top of her class from UC Davis, had worked at prestigious clinics in Los Angeles and San before returning to her of Phoenix. She performed thousands of surgeries, saved countless lives, and had learned to separate emotion from medical necessity. It was the only way to survive in emergency veterinary medicine, where heartbreak was a daily occurrence. But when James carried that stretcher into her exam room, followed by a sobbing nurse still in her coffee-stained scrubs, Dr. Mitchell felt something crack inside her professional armor. The examination was brutal. With each discovery, Dr. Mitchell's heart sank deeper. Severe spinal trauma, the kind that typically meant permanent paralysis. Multiple healed fractures in various stages, suggesting chronic abuse over months or possibly years. Advanced malnutrition indicating at least 3 weeks without proper food. Dehydration so severe his organs were beginning to shut down. Infected wounds that would require aggressive antibiotic treatment. And the coup, when she took X-rays, she found evidence of old internal bleeding and damaged vertebrae that had healed incorrectly. She stepped out of the exam room to find Maria and James waiting in the hallway, their faces etched with desperate hope. This was the part of her job she hated most, crushing hope, delivering news that would break hearts. "The damage is extensive," Dr. Mitchell began, and watched their faces fall. "His spine is severely injured, likely from being hit by a car. That was probably months ago, which means he's been dragging himself around for a very long time. The fractures, the malnutrition, the infections, treating all of this would require surgery, intensive care, months of rehabilitation. We're talking about $8,000 to $10,000 minimum. And even with all that, there's no guarantee he'll ever walk again. His back legs show no neurological response. The humane thing." "Don't," Maria interrupted, her voice sharp. "Don't say it. Don't tell me the humane thing is to kill him. Ms., I understand your emotional attachment, but—" "Emotional attachment," Maria's voice rose. "I found him crawling across burning pavement. He was begging for help, and I'm probably the first person who stopped. You didn't see his eyes. You didn't see him trying to wag his tail even though every movement caused him pain. That dog wants to live, Dr. Mitchell. He's fighting to live." James stepped forward. "How much does the shelter have in the emergency fund?" Dr. Mitchell's shoulders sagged. $200, maybe. The silence that followed was suffocating. $200 against 8,000. The math was impossible. Maria looked at James, James looked at Dr. Mitchell, and they all knew what came next. The standard protocol was clear. When an animal had injuries this severe and no owner to claim them and no funds for treatment, euthanasia was the only option. It was merciful. It was practical. It was the right decision. Dr. Mitchell began filling out the paperwork, her hand moving mechanically across the form. She'd done this hundreds of times before. It never got easier, but it was part of the job. She'd give him a sedative first, then the final injection. He wouldn't feel pain. He'd just drift off to sleep, finally free from suffering. She was reaching for the sedative when she heard a sound from the exam room. A soft thump, then another. Dr. Mitchell pushed the door open and froze. The dog had somehow dragged himself to a sitting position. His useless back legs splayed awkwardly beneath him, but his front half was upright, head held high despite obvious exhaustion. And when he saw Dr. Mitchell enter, his tail began to wag. Not just a weak flutter, a real wag back and forth, back and forth. Their eyes met across the exam room. In his gaze, Dr. Mitchell saw no plea for death, no resignation to his fate. She saw determination. She saw hope. She saw a spirit that refused to be broken, no matter what life had thrown at him. The sedative vial slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the stainless steel counter. "Maria," Dr. Mitchell called out, her voice suddenly stronger. "How fast can you set up a fundraising page?" Maria's hands were still trembling as she sat in the veterinary clinic's waiting room, her phone clutched between her palms like a lifeline. It was 9:47 p.m., nearly 12 hours since she'd found the dog on Industrial Boulevard. 12 hours that had felt like 12 years. She'd called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, unable to leave this brave creature's side. Dr. Mitchell had stabilized him with fluids and pain medication, but the clock was ticking. They had maybe 48 hours to raise the money before his condition would deteriorate beyond saving. The dog she'd named him after her late grandfather, another fighter who'd never given up, was sleeping in the recovery room. Maria could see him through the observation window, his small frame rising and falling with each breath. He looked so peaceful now, finally free from pain, at least temporarily. But peace had a price tag, $8,000, a sum that might as well have been $1 million to a single mother working as a nurse. Maria opened Facebook on her phone. She had 342 friends, mostly a few high school acquaintances, some family members scattered across Arizona and New Mexico. She'd never been much of a social media person. Her last post had been 6 months ago, a photo of her daughters, but tonight she had to try something. Anything. She scrolled through the photos she'd taken that morning. Most were too graphic. The blood, the wounds, the horror of his condition. But there was one image that captured something else entirely. It was the moment right after James had lifted onto the stretcher. Despite his pain, despite everything, was looking directly at the camera with those impossibly hopeful eyes, and his tail was mid-wag. It was a photograph that somehow contained both heartbreak and hope in a single frame. Maria's fingers flew across her phone's keyboard. I found him this morning dragging his paralyzed body across the street begging for help. He's been hit by a car, starved and abandoned. He should be dead, but he's not. He's fighting to live. The vet says he needs $8,000 for surgery and treatment. I don't have that kind of money, but this brave boy deserves a chance. If you can spare even $5, please help me save him. She attached the photo, added a link to a GoFundMe page she'd hastily created with a goal of $5,000. Less than what was needed, but she figured she'd have to cover the rest somehow, maybe take out a loan and hit post at 9:52 p.m. Then she waited. At 10:03 p.m. her phone buzzed. Her Jennifer had donated $20 and shared the post. "Praying for this sweet boy," the comment read. At 10:17 p.m. another notification. Her cousin in Albuquerque, $50. He looks like a fighter. By 10:30 p.m., Maria had raised $340. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was hope. She allowed herself to drift off in the uncomfortable waiting room chair, exhausted from the emotional of the day. She woke to her phone vibrating so violently it fell off her lap and clattered onto the floor. Disoriented, Maria grabbed it and stared at the screen. 11:47 p.m. She'd been asleep for just over an hour. But her phone was exploding with notifications, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, scrolling so fast she couldn't read them. Her Facebook post had 347 shares. Maria blinked and refreshed the page. 1,293 shares. She refreshed again, her heart beginning to pound. 2,847 shares. What the hell? She whispered into the empty waiting room. She opened her GoFundMe page and nearly dropped her phone. The total raised was $4,320 and climbing in real time. As she watched, frozen in disbelief, it jumped to $4,410, then $4,590. Someone named Robert from California had just donated $500. An anonymous donor gave $1,000. A woman named from Florida sent $100 with a message. I lost my dog last year to cancer. Save this baby for me. Maria's hands flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her face. She refreshed her Facebook page again. The post had been shared 8,000 times. Comments were pouring in from people she'd never met, from cities she'd never heard of. Shared from Ohio, praying for. Donated from Seattle, this broke my heart, please save him. Shared in my Texas rescue group, we're all watching. I'm in tears, take my $50, save this warrior. By midnight, story had spread beyond Maria's friends' circle, beyond Phoenix, beyond Arizona. It was being shared in Chicago rescue groups, New York animal advocacy pages, Los Angeles shelter networks. Someone had cross-posted it too. Then Twitter. Then Instagram. The photograph of broken but hopeful, suffering but still trusting, was resonating with something deep in the human psyche. At 1:23 a.m., Dr. Mitchell emerged from her office, drawn by the sound of Maria's sobbing. What's wrong, is it? We hit the goal, Maria choked out, holding up her phone. Dr. Mitchell, we hit the goal. We're at $8,200. People are still donating. They won't stop donating. Dr. Mitchell took the phone with shaking hands and scrolled through the comments. Messages from every state in America, from Canada, from the UK, from Australia. A woman in Germany had donated €50. A teenager in Japan sent $10 with a message in broken English. My dog also rescue, must live, please fight. How is this happening? Dr. Mitchell whispered. Neither of them had an answer, but as they stood in that quiet clinic in the early hours of Wednesday morning, watching the numbers climb 9,000, $10,000, $11,000, they began to understand something profound. Story wasn't just about one paralyzed dog. It was about every time someone had driven past suffering and looked away. Every time someone had felt helpless in the face of cruelty. Every time someone wished they could make a difference but didn't know how. Had given thousands of strangers the chance to be the person who stopped, the person who helped, the person who cared. By 3:00 a.m., as the Arizona sky began to lighten toward dawn, the fundraiser had reached $15,000. Maria's post had been shared 50,000 times. Local news stations were calling the clinic, asking for interviews. A reporter from the Arizona Republic was already in the parking lot. At 3:47 a.m., Maria's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize with a California area code. Exhausted and overwhelmed, she almost didn't answer. Hello? Is this Maria, the woman who rescued? The voice was professional, female, urgent. Yes, who is? My name is from Good Morning America. Ms. Story has gone viral nationwide. We've received hundreds of messages asking us to cover his story. Would you be willing to appear on our show tomorrow morning via satellite? We want to tell story to the entire country. Maria looked through the observation window at, still sleeping peacefully, unaware that he'd somehow become a symbol of hope for hundreds of thousands of people he'd never meet. A paralyzed stray dog who'd been crawling through the streets just yesterday was about to appear on national television. "Yes," Maria said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Yes, I'll do it. The world needs to know about. The world needs to know that miracles still happen when people choose to care." As dawn broke over Phoenix, stirred in his recovery bed, his tail gave a small wag, the same gesture of hope that had started everything. And somewhere in the darkness of the clinic, both Maria and Dr. Mitchell smiled through their tears, knowing that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. The donations were still climbing, the shares were still multiplying, and story was spreading like wildfire across a world desperate for something good to believe in. By sunrise, they had raised $23,000, and the story of the dog who refused to give up was just getting started. Maria's hands were still trembling as she sat in the veterinary clinic's waiting room, her phone clutched between her palms like a lifeline. It was 9:47 p.m., nearly 12 hours since she'd found the dog on Industrial Boulevard. 12 hours that had felt like 12 years. She'd called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, unable to leave this brave creature's side. Dr. Mitchell had stabilized him with fluids and pain medication, but the clock was ticking. They had maybe 48 hours to raise the money before his condition would deteriorate beyond saving. The dog she'd named him after her late grandfather, another fighter who'd never given up, was sleeping in the recovery room. Maria could see him through the observation window, his small frame rising and falling with each breath. He looked so peaceful now, finally free from pain, at least temporarily. But peace had a price tag, $8,000, a sum that might as well have been $1 million to a single mother working as a nurse. Maria opened Facebook on her phone. She had 342 friends, mostly a few high school acquaintances, some family members scattered across Arizona and New Mexico. She'd never been much of a social media person. Her last post had been 6 months ago, a photo of her daughters, but tonight she had to try something. Anything. She scrolled through the photos she'd taken that morning. Most were too graphic, the blood, the wounds, the horror of his condition. But there was one image that captured something else entirely. It was the moment right after James had lifted onto the stretcher. Despite his pain, despite everything, was looking directly at the camera with those impossibly hopeful eyes, and his tail was mid-wag. It was a photograph that somehow contained both heartbreak and hope in a single frame. Maria's fingers flew across her phone's keyboard. I found him this morning dragging his paralyzed body across the street begging for help. He's been hit by a car, starved and abandoned. He should be dead, but he's not. He's fighting to live. The vet says he needs $8,000 for surgery and treatment. I don't have that kind of money, but this brave boy deserves a chance. If you can spare even $5, please help me save him. She attached the photo, added a link to a GoFundMe page she'd hastily created with a goal of $5,000. Less than what was needed, but she figured she'd have to cover the rest somehow, maybe take out a loan and hit post at 9:52 p.m. Then she waited. At 10:03 p.m. her phone buzzed. Her Jennifer had donated $20 and shared the post. "Praying for this sweet boy," the comment read. At 10:17 p.m. another notification. Her cousin in Albuquerque, $50. He looks like a fighter. By 10:30 p.m., Maria had raised $340. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was hope. She allowed herself to drift off in the uncomfortable waiting room chair, exhausted from the emotional of the day. She woke to her phone vibrating so violently it fell off her lap and clattered onto the floor. Disoriented, Maria grabbed it and stared at the screen. 11:47 p.m. She'd been asleep for just over an hour, but her phone was exploding with notifications, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, scrolling so fast she couldn't read them. Her Facebook post had 347 shares. Maria blinked and refreshed the page. 1,293 shares. She refreshed again, her heart beginning to pound. 2,847 shares. "What the hell?" she whispered into the empty waiting room. She opened her GoFundMe page and nearly dropped her phone. The total raised was $4,320 and climbing in real time. As she watched, frozen in disbelief, it jumped to $4,410, then $4,590. Someone named Robert from California had just donated $500. An anonymous donor gave $1,000. A woman named from Florida sent $100 with a message. "I lost my dog last year to cancer. Save this baby for me." Maria's hands flew to her mouth as tears streamed down her face. She refreshed her Facebook page again. The post had been shared 8,000 times. Comments were pouring in from people she'd never met, from cities she'd never heard of. Shared from Ohio, praying for. Donated from Seattle, "This broke my heart, please save him." Shared in my Texas rescue group, "We're all watching." "I'm in tears, take my $50, save this warrior." By midnight, story had spread beyond Maria's friend circle, beyond Phoenix, beyond Arizona. It was being shared in Chicago rescue groups, New York animal advocacy pages, Los Angeles shelter networks. Someone had cross-posted it too. Then Twitter. Then Instagram. The photograph of broken but hopeful, suffering but still trusting, was resonating with something deep in the human psyche. At 1:23 a.m., Dr. Mitchell emerged from her office, drawn by the sound of Maria's sobbing. "What's wrong, is it?" "We hit the goal," Maria choked out, holding up her phone. "Dr. Mitchell, we hit the goal. We're at $8,200. People are still donating. They won't stop donating." Dr. Mitchell took the phone with shaking hands and scrolled through the comments. Messages from every state in America, from Canada, from the UK, from Australia. A woman in Germany had donated €50. A teenager in Japan sent $10 with a message in broken English. "My dog also rescue. Must live. Please fight." "How is this happening?" Dr. Mitchell whispered. Neither of them had an answer. But as they stood in that quiet clinic in the early hours of Wednesday morning, watching the numbers climb 9,000, $10,000, $11,000, they began to understand something profound. Story wasn't just about one paralyzed dog. It was about every time someone had driven past suffering and looked away. Every time someone had felt helpless in the face of cruelty. Every time someone wished they could make a difference but didn't know how. Had given thousands of strangers the chance to be the person who stopped, the person who helped, the person who cared. By 3:00 a.m., as the Arizona sky began to lighten toward dawn, the fundraiser had reached $15,000. Maria's post had been shared 50,000 times. Local news stations were calling the clinic, asking for interviews. A reporter from the Arizona Republic was already in the parking lot. At 3:47 a.m., Maria's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize with a California area code. Exhausted and overwhelmed, she almost didn't answer. "Hello? Is this Maria, the woman who rescued?" The voice was professional, female, urgent. "Yes, who is?" "My name is from Good Morning America. Ms. Story has gone viral nationwide. We've received hundreds of messages asking us to cover his story. Would you be willing to appear on our show tomorrow morning via satellite? We want to tell story to the entire country." Maria looked through the observation window at, still sleeping peacefully, unaware that he'd somehow become a symbol of hope for hundreds of thousands of people he'd never meet. A paralyzed stray dog who'd been crawling through the streets just yesterday was about to appear on national television. "Yes," Maria said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Yes, I'll do it. The world needs to know about. The world needs to know that miracles still happen when people choose to care." As dawn broke over Phoenix, stirred in his recovery bed, his tail gave a small wag, the same gesture of hope that had started everything. And somewhere in the darkness of the clinic, both Maria and Dr. Mitchell smiled through their tears, knowing that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. The donations were still climbing. The shares were still multiplying, and story was spreading like wildfire across a world desperate for something good to believe in. By sunrise, they had raised $23,000, and the story of the dog who refused to give up was just getting started. The Good Morning America segment aired at 7:42 a.m. Eastern Time on Thursday morning, just 2 days after Maria had found crawling across Industrial Boulevard. Millions of Americans sat with their coffee and watched as Maria, exhausted but determined, told story to the nation. The camera cut to footage of in his recovery kennel, his soulful eyes staring directly into the lens, and the show's host had to pause to collect herself, her voice breaking with emotion. By 8:00 a.m., the fundraiser had exploded to $47,000. By noon, $89,000. The clinic's phone lines were jammed with media requests, donation questions, and people from across the country asking for updates. Dr. Mitchell had to hire 2 temporary staff members just to handle the calls. But amid the chaos and celebration, a grim reality loomed. All the money in the world couldn't guarantee that would survive what came next. The surgery was scheduled for Friday morning at 6:00 a.m. Dr. Mitchell had assembled the best veterinary surgical team in Arizona, Dr. Robert Hayes, a renowned veterinary neurologist from Scottsdale, and a specialist in orthopedic surgery who'd flown in from San specifically for his case. They'd studied his x-rays for hours, mapping out a surgical plan that would be his only shot at any quality of life. Maria spent Thursday night at the clinic, refusing to leave his side. She'd pulled a chair up to his kennel and sat with her hand resting against the bars, her fingers just inches from his nose. Would occasionally wake, see her there, and his tail would thump weakly against the blanket. Each time, Maria's heart broke and healed simultaneously. "You're going to make it through this," she whispered to him in the dark clinic. "You've come too far to give up now. We've all come too far." At 5:30 a.m. Friday morning, the surgical team arrived. Maria was allowed to stay with until the moment they wheeled him into the operating room. She kissed his head, careful to avoid his wounds, and pressed her forehead against his. "Fight. The world is watching. We all believe in you." The surgery began at 6:14 a.m. and would last 4.5 hours. Maria, James, and a growing crowd of supporters gathered in the waiting room. News vans lined the parking lot. Strangers who donated online showed up just to wait to be part of his journey. A little girl named Sophie, who'd convinced her parents to drive 2 hours from Tucson, held a hand-drawn sign, "We love you." Inside operating room 3, Dr. Mitchell made the first incision, her hands steady despite the pressure. But what the team discovered in those first 30 minutes would shock them all and reveal a truth far darker than they'd imagined. "My God," Dr. Hayes breathed, staring at the monitor. "Sarah, are you seeing this?" Embedded throughout his body were small metal fragments, BB gun pellets, dozens of them. Some were old, encased in scar tissue, suggesting they'd been there for years. Others were more recent. Someone hadn't just abandoned. Someone had used him for target practice, had tortured him repeatedly over what must have been most of his life. Doctor's jaw clenched. This wasn't just a hit and run. This dog has been systematically abused for years. The team worked in heavy silence, carefully removing accessible pellets while navigating around his damaged spine. The spinal injury itself was catastrophic. 3 vertebrae were fractured, with significant nerve damage to the lumbar region. Medical textbooks would classify this as permanent paralysis. The chances of ever walking again were, by any scientific measure, essentially zero. But the surgical team had seen that photograph. They'd read the thousands of messages from people around the world. They'd witnessed his unbreakable spirit. And they made a collective, unspoken decision. They would give him every possible chance, no matter what the textbooks said. Dr. Mitchell carefully stabilized the damaged vertebrae with surgical pins and plates. Dr. Hayes worked to relieve pressure on the spinal cord, removing bone fragments and scar tissue. Doctor addressed the multiple old fractures in hips and legs that had healed incorrectly and resetting them. It was delicate, painstaking work. One wrong move could end life on the table. At 9:47 a.m., a surgical assistant emerged to update the waiting room. "He's stable. The surgery is going well, but they've discovered evidence of severe, long-term abuse. There are BB gun pellets throughout his body." The waiting room erupted in gasps and sobs. Sophie's mother held her daughter close. James stood abruptly and walked outside, needing air, needing space to process the rage burning in his chest. How could anyone do this to an innocent animal? How could someone torture a creature that asked for nothing but love? Inside, Maria sat frozen, her hands covering her mouth. All those wounds, all that suffering, it hadn't been just one accident. It had been a lifetime of cruelty, and yet somehow, impossibly, still trusted humans, still hoped, still loved. The surgery concluded at 10:43 a.m. Dr. Mitchell emerged from the operating room, still in her surgical scrubs, her mask pulled down, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. The waiting room fell silent as every eye turned to her. "Made it through surgery," she announced, and the room exploded in cheers and tears. "But I need everyone to understand something. The damage to his spine is severe. We've done everything medically possible, but the likelihood of him regaining use of his back legs is extremely low. We're talking about maybe a 1 or 2% chance, if that. He'll likely need a wheelchair for mobility for the rest of his life." "But he'll live?" Maria asked, her voice small. Dr. Mitchell's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, he'll live, and he'll have a good life, even if it's different than a typical dog's life. But I want to be clear about expectations." "He's alive," James interrupted, his voice firm. "That's all that matters. We'll figure out the rest." What none of them knew, what no one in that waiting room could have possibly predicted, was that hadn't read the medical textbooks. He didn't know that his injury was classified as permanent. He didn't understand statistics or prognoses or the limitations of canine neurology. All knew was that people had finally chosen to help him, to fight for him, to believe in him. And he wasn't about to let them down. The recovery room was quiet when finally woke from anesthesia at 2:15 p.m. Maria was there, as she'd promised, her hand resting gently on his head. His eyes flickered open, unfocused and confused from the medications. He whimpered softly, not from pain. The drugs were managing that, but from fear and disorientation. "I'm here, baby boy," Maria whispered. "You did so good, you're so brave. Now comes the hard part. You have to heal, you have to fight." His eyes found hers, and in that moment of connection something passed between them. A promise, a pact. He would fight, and she would be there every step of the way. Outside the recovery room window, the Arizona sun blazed in a cloudless sky. News helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting updates to millions of viewers. Social media was exploding with prayers and well wishes from every corner of the globe. A GoFundMe page that had started with a modest goal of $5,000 now stood at $127,000, with donations still pouring in. Had become more than just a dog. He'd become a symbol of resilience, of hope, of the unbreakable spirit that exists in all living things when given even the smallest chance. The surgery was over. The real battle was about to begin, and the whole world was watching to see if a dog who'd been shot, starved, abandoned, and left for dead could somehow, impossibly, prove the medical textbooks wrong. 3 weeks had passed since surgery, and the Phoenix Emergency Veterinary Clinic had transformed into something resembling a pilgrimage site. Every day, dozens of people stopped by with gifts, stuffed animals, blankets, handmade cards, treats. A local artist had painted a mural on the clinic's exterior wall, capturing those hopeful eyes that had captured the world's heart. But inside the rehabilitation room, the reality was far less inspiring than the fairy tale the public imagined. Was struggling. Physical therapist Lee had worked with paralyzed dogs for 12 years. She'd seen successes and heartbreaks, miraculous recoveries and devastating setbacks. She prided herself on maintaining professional boundaries, on not getting emotionally attached to her patients, but was testing every wall she'd ever built. "Come on, just try," encouraged, supporting his body in the heated hydrotherapy pool. The warm water was supposed to make movement easier, to encourage his muscles to engage. But's back legs hung lifeless in the water, unresponsive despite weeks of intensive therapy. Whimpered, his front legs paddling weakly. The surgery incisions had healed beautifully, and he'd gained 15 pounds of healthy weight. Physically, his body was recovering, but his legs remained stubbornly paralyzed, exactly as Dr. Mitchell had predicted. The 1 or 2% chance of recovery was looking more like 0% with each passing day. "I know it's hard, buddy," said softly, blinking back tears she shouldn't be crying. "I know you're trying." The truth was trying desperately, heartbreakingly hard. Could see it in his eyes every session. He wanted to please her, wanted to move those legs, wanted to be whole again. But wanting wasn't enough. Medical science was cold and definitive. His spinal cord was too damaged. The nerves that controlled his hind legs were simply gone. Maria visited every single day after her nursing shifts, often staying until the clinic closed at 9 p.m. She'd sit beside the therapy pool, talking to, encouraging him, telling him about all the people who loved him and were praying for him. But even Maria's optimism was beginning to crack under the weight of reality. "Maybe we need to accept that this is how he'll be," Maria said one evening in late August, her voice hollow. "Maybe we should focus on getting him a good wheelchair, making sure he has the best life possible as a paralyzed dog." Nodded, unable to disagree. "He can still have a wonderful life, Maria. Lots of dogs thrive with mobility devices. He can still run and play, just differently." But both women felt the weight of what they weren't saying. They'd all hoped for a miracle. The world had donated over $150,000 expecting a miracle. And miracles, it seemed, didn't actually happen. No matter how much you wanted them to, no matter how hard you tried, no matter how many people prayed. It was a Tuesday afternoon, September 3rd, when everything changed. The clinic had a small observation area where visitors could watch therapy sessions through a large window without disturbing the animals. That day, a family had come to visit, the Johnsons from Tempe. Their 8-year-old daughter had been following Story since the beginning. She donated her birthday money to his fund, had written him letters, had begged her parents to bring her to see him. Pressed her small hands against the glass, her nose practically touching the window as she watched therapy session. Was in the pool with him, going through the motions that had become routine and, honestly, a bit hopeless. Paddled with his front legs, his back end supported by his hands, his rear legs hanging uselessly in the water. "Come on," suddenly shouted, her voice muffled by the glass but full of pure, unfiltered belief. "You can do it. Move your legs, I know you can." Glanced at the window and smiled sadly. The innocence of children. They still believed in miracles because no one had taught them yet how rare miracles actually were. But heard that voice. His ears perked up and his head swiveled toward the window. He saw her face bright with encouragement, her small fists pumping in the air like a coach rallying her team. And something in his brain, some deep primal instinct that had kept him crawling through streets when he should have died, that had kept him trusting humans even after they'd tortured him, that had kept him fighting when every logical reason said to give up, clicked into place. His left hind leg twitched. It was so subtle that almost missed it, just a tiny flutter of muscle beneath her supporting hand. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. As she whispered, was still cheering at the window, "You're the strongest dog ever. Show them what you can do." His eyes remained locked on the little girl. And then, impossibly, miraculously, his left leg moved again. Not a twitch this time. A deliberate movement, a kick against the water, weak but unmistakable. "Oh my God," breathed. "Do that again, move your leg again." As if he understood, his left leg pushed against the water once more. Then, seconds later, his right leg gave a small flutter. His professional composure shattered completely. "Sarah," she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Doctor, Mitchell, get in here right now." Dr. Mitchell came running, still holding a clipboard, her white coat flying behind her. "What's wrong? Is he?" "Watch his legs. Come on, baby, show her. Move those legs." Was jumping up and down at the window now, her parents filming on their phones, not fully understanding what was happening but feeling the electric energy in the air. "Go, move your legs. You can do it." And Sweet, who'd been told by medical science that he'd never walk again, looked at that little girl who believed in him with her whole heart, and both back legs moved. Not much, not strong, but they moved with clear intention, pushing through the water in a weak but deliberate kick. Dr. Mitchell's clipboard clattered to the wet floor. Her hand flew to her mouth as tears instantly flooded her eyes. That's not possible. The damage to his spine the X-rays showed." "I don't care what the X-rays showed," interrupted, laughing and crying simultaneously. "His legs just moved, multiple times, deliberately. Sarah, he's responding to motor commands. He's getting signals through." For the next 10 minutes they worked with, encouraging him, praising him, cheering every tiny movement. The legs were weak, barely able to push through the water, but the motion was there. The connection between brain and muscle that had been severed was somehow, impossibly, beginning to repair itself. His father knocked on the glass. "Is he okay? Did something good happen?" Looked up at the family, her face streaked with joyful tears. "Your daughter just witnessed a miracle. Legs moved. After 3 weeks of complete paralysis, his legs just moved." Shriek of joy could be heard throughout the entire clinic. She jumped so high her father had to catch her, and she burst into tears, sobbing with happiness for a dog she'd never actually touched but had loved from afar. Maria received the phone call at 4:17 p.m. while she was changing an IV bag at Phoenix General Hospital. When she heard Dr. Mitchell's voice say, "Maria, you need to get here right now." Moved his legs. She dropped the IV bag, didn't bother to explain to her confused colleagues, and ran to her car, breaking every speed limit between the hospital and the clinic. When she burst through the door 23 minutes later, breathless and terrified this was a cruel joke, she found still in the pool with, and Dr. Mitchell sitting on the pool's edge, her shoes kicked off, her feet dangling in the water, her face glowing with wonder. "Show her," Dr. Mitchell said softly. "Show Maria what you can do." Looked at Maria, the woman who'd stopped when everyone else had driven past, the woman who'd refused to let him die, the woman who'd sat beside him every single day. And with what must have taken every ounce of strength in his healing body, both back legs pushed through the water in a slow, deliberate kick. Maria's knees buckled. She collapsed onto the wet floor beside the pool, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. "You're walking," she choked out. "You're going to walk again. Oh God, you're going to walk." "We don't know that yet," Dr. Mitchell cautioned, ever the scientist even in the face of the impossible. "This could be just reflex recovery. We need more time, more tests. We can't get our hopes up too high." But even as she said it, Dr. Mitchell knew she was lying. They all knew. Something extraordinary was happening. A dog that medical science had declared permanently paralyzed was defying every textbook, every statistic, every logical prediction. The 1% chance that everyone had dismissed as impossible was unfolding in a hydrotherapy pool in Phoenix, Arizona, witnessed by a little girl who'd never stopped believing and 3 grown women who'd learned that sometimes, just sometimes, love and determination could rewrite the rules of biology itself. That night, Maria posted a video of his leg movements on social media. The caption read simply, "He's fighting, and he's winning." Within 2 hours, the video had 5 million views. By morning, it would reach 50 million. The comments poured in from every corner of the world, all saying the same thing in different languages. We knew he could do it. We never stopped believing. But the real miracle wasn't just that his legs had moved. It was that a tortured, abandoned, paralyzed dog had taught millions of strangers that the impossible is only impossible until someone refuses to accept it. The video of his first leg movements didn't just go viral, it became a cultural phenomenon. By September 5th, just 2 days after had witnessed the impossible, story had been featured on every major news network in America. CNN ran a special segment. The Today Show dedicated 10 minutes to his journey. Ellen called the clinic personally, asking if Maria and would appear on her show. Even international media picked up the story, BBC, CBC, all broadcasting the tale of the paralyzed dog who refused to accept his fate. But it was social media where its impact truly exploded into something unprecedented. The hashtag The Warrior was trending worldwide. Parents showed the videos to their children as lessons in perseverance. Teachers used his story in classrooms to discuss resilience and hope. Therapists shared his journey with patients battling depression and hopelessness. Had transcended being just a rescue dog, he'd become a living symbol that miracles could happen when you refuse to give up. Maria's phone never stopped buzzing. Messages came from every imaginable source. A veteran who'd lost his legs in Afghanistan wrote, "If can fight to walk again, so can I, starting physical therapy tomorrow because of him." A teenager battling cancer sent a tearful video message. "When I want to quit chemo, I watch videos and remember that warriors don't give up." A widow grieving her husband's death for 3 years wrote, "Reminded me that it's okay to hope again, even after the worst has happened." The donations continued to pour in, far exceeding what was needed for care. By mid-September, the fundraiser had reached $287,000. Dr. Mitchell and Maria made a decision that would change countless lives. They established the Second Chance Fund, dedicated to helping other animals with catastrophic injuries receive the medical care they deserved. The excess money would save dogs, cats, horses, and other animals who would have otherwise been euthanized due to lack of funds. Teaching us that every life deserves a chance, Maria announced in a Facebook Live video that reached 3.2 million viewers. He's not just saving himself, he's saving others too. Meanwhile, inside the clinic, rehabilitation intensified dramatically. What had started as weak twitches in the water had progressed to stronger, more coordinated movements. Increased his therapy to twice-daily sessions. Attacked each one with an intensity that left everyone in awe. It was as if he understood that the world was watching, that people were counting on him, that his fight mattered beyond himself. "I've never seen anything like this," told a documentary crew that was now filming his recovery. "Most animals with his injuries would have given up, but every day he works harder, every day he pushes further. It's like he's on a mission." The transformation was happening faster than anyone thought possible. By September 15th, just 12 days after that first leg twitch, could push both back legs in coordinated movements during hydrotherapy. The kicks were still weak, still unsteady, but they were deliberate and improving daily. Dr. Mitchell brought in Dr. Hayes, the neurologist who'd assisted with surgery, for a follow-up examination. After reviewing new X-rays and conducting neurological tests, Dr. Hayes sat in stunned silence for a full minute before speaking. "This shouldn't be happening," he finally said, his voice filled with wonder. "The spinal damage was too severe. The nerve pathways were destroyed. There's no medical explanation for this level of recovery. It's like his body is rewiring itself." "So what do we do?" Dr. Mitchell asked. Dr. Hayes looked at her with eyes that had seen 30 years of veterinary medicine and had never witnessed anything quite like this. "We document everything. We push him as hard as he can handle, and we prepare ourselves for the possibility that we might be watching something that will rewrite veterinary neurology textbooks." The real test came on September 22nd. Had been preparing for weeks, strengthening his muscles, teaching him balance, building his confidence. Now it was time to see if he could support his own weight outside the water. They'd set up a specialized harness system, straps that would support most of his body weight while allowing his legs to touch the ground and attempt to bear weight. The clinic's rehabilitation room was packed. Maria had taken the day off work. James, the animal control officer who'd rescued, had driven from across the city. Dr. Mitchell and her entire staff were present, and standing at the observation window was the little girl whose belief had sparked first movement, along with her entire family. Was lifted into the harness, his body suspended by straps while his paws just touched the rubberized floor. For a moment, he hung there, confused and uncertain. His front legs were strong, but his back legs, those legs that had been dragged lifeless across burning pavement 3 months ago, trembled with the effort of even touching the ground. "You can do this," Maria whispered, kneeling in front of him. "Remember who you are. Remember what you've already survived. You're the strongest dog in the world." His eyes met Maria's, and then, with the entire room holding their breath, he shifted his weight. His left back leg bent slightly, attempting to bear load. It buckled immediately but was there, adjusting the harness support. "Try again, buddy. We've got you. You can't fall. We won't let you." Tried again. This time his left leg held for 2 seconds before giving out, then 3 seconds, then 5. Each attempt was building strength, building neural connections, building something that medical science said couldn't be built. Pressed against the window, tears streaming down her 8-year-old face. "Don't give up, you're so close." And then it happened. His right back leg, the one that had been completely unresponsive for months, suddenly engaged. Both back legs were now bearing weight, not much, maybe 20% of his body weight, but they were doing it, together, working as a team. The room erupted, burst into tears, her hands flying to her mouth. Dr. Mitchell grabbed James' arm, squeezing it so hard she'd leave bruises. Maria collapsed forward, pressing her forehead to the floor, her shoulders shaking with sobs. But the most extraordinary moment came from himself. As everyone celebrated around him, he took a step. It wasn't much. His back legs barely moved, more of a shuffle than a true step, with 90% of his weight still supported by the harness and his front legs. But his back paw lifted off the ground and moved forward 6 inches before setting down again. Then the other back paw did the same. 2 steps, had taken 2 steps. "Get the camera," Dr. Mitchell shouted. "Someone record this. The world needs to see this." 3 different phones immediately started recording. For the next 20 minutes, worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. 2 steps became 4. 4 became 8. He could only manage short bursts before his legs would give out, requiring several minutes of rest between attempts. But he kept trying, kept fighting, kept proving that the word impossible meant nothing to a dog who'd already survived the unsurvivable. Maria posted the video at 3:47 p.m. with a simple caption, "2 steps, 2 impossible, miraculous, beautiful steps, is walking." The internet exploded, again. Within 1 hour, the video had 10 million views. Within 3 hours, 30 million. By midnight, it had been viewed over 100 million times, making it one of the most watched videos in social media history. News outlets around the globe interrupted regular programming to show the footage. In Times Square, the massive digital billboards displayed its image with the text, "Never give up." The comments section became a digital ocean of tears and inspiration. A Paralympic athlete wrote, "I've been preparing for the Tokyo Paralympics for years, but watching take those 2 steps gave me more motivation than any training session ever has." A single mother battling homelessness commented, "If he can fight this hard, I can fight to get my family back on our feet." A surgeon in Boston posted, "I'm showing this to every patient who tells me recovery is too hard. Just became required viewing in my practice." Celebrity responses poured in. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson shared the video. "This is what a real warrior looks like." Tweeted, "Reminds us that the human and animal spirit is capable of the extraordinary." Lady Gaga posted, crying over a dog I've never met but who's taught me more about courage than most humans. But perhaps the most touching response came from Phoenix Children's Hospital. The Pediatric Rehabilitation Center requested permission to bring child patients to visit during his therapy sessions. They'd noticed something remarkable. Children who watched videos showed increased effort in their own physical therapy. Kids who'd been ready to quit were suddenly motivated to try harder. "It's become their hero," explained Doctor, head of pediatric rehabilitation. "When a 7-year-old tells me if can do it, I can do it. That's the kind of motivation that changes outcomes." On September 30th, exactly 1 week after those first 2 steps, walked 12 steps before his legs gave out. By October 5th, he managed 27 steps. The harness support was gradually decreased as his muscles strengthened, and his neural pathways continued their impossible reconstruction. The GoFundMe page now stood at $342,000, with donations still arriving daily. The Second Chance Fund had already saved 17 other animals from euthanasia, providing them with surgeries and treatments their families couldn't afford. Story was creating a ripple effect of compassion that extended far beyond one dog's recovery. Maria sat with one evening after an exhausting therapy session, her arms wrapped gently around his shoulders. He was tired, his muscles trembling from exertion, but his tail was wagging softly. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she whispered to him. "You've changed the world, you've given hope to millions of people, you've proven that miracles are real." Licked her face, his eyes bright despite his exhaustion. He didn't understand viral videos or trending hashtags or media phenomena. All he knew was that he'd been shown love when he'd expected death, given chances when logic said there were none, and surrounded by people who refused to let him fail. And in return, he'd given them the only thing he had to give: his absolute refusal to surrender, his complete determination to prove that love and belief and relentless effort could overcome any obstacle. The world was watching, and was just getting started. October arrived in Phoenix with slightly cooler temperatures, and a calendar filled with what Dr. Mitchell had started calling miracles. Every week brought new progress that shouldn't have been medically possible. By October 12th, 4 months after Maria had found him crawling across Industrial Boulevard, could walk 20 yards with only 40% harness support. His gait was wobbly and uncoordinated, his back legs still weak and uncertain, but he was walking. Actually walking. The custom mobility cart arrived on October 15th from a specialty manufacturer in Colorado. It was designed to support his hindquarters with wheels while he built strength, allowing him to move freely without overexerting his healing spine. The bright blue cart was fitted perfectly to his body, with padded straps and adjustable supports. When first placed in the cart, something magical happened. For the first time since his injury, could move independently at his own pace. His front legs were strong, and with the cart supporting his rear, he could finally run. And run he did, around the rehabilitation room, his tongue lolling out in pure joy, his tail wagging so hard his entire back end would have been swinging if the cart weren't holding it steady. "Look at him," Maria laughed through tears, filming the moment for the millions of followers who checked for updates every single day. He remembers what freedom feels like, but had bigger plans than just personal recovery. What happened next would cement his legacy as more than just a survivor. He would become a healer. The first visit from Phoenix Children's Hospital took place on October 22nd. 6 children, ages 5 to 12, all undergoing physical therapy for various conditions: cerebral palsy, spinal injuries, muscular dystrophy, arrived at the clinic with their parents and therapists. They'd been watching videos for months, and now they'd finally meet their hero. 10-year-old rolled his wheelchair into the rehabilitation room, his eyes scanning nervously had been paralyzed from the waist down in a car accident 8 months earlier. He'd been angry, depressed, refusing to participate in therapy. "What's the point?" he'd told his mother repeatedly. "I'll never walk again anyway." but then had discovered story. He'd watched every video, read every update, and told his mother, "If a dog can learn to walk after being paralyzed, maybe I can too." When saw the children enter, something extraordinary happened. He'd been resting after a therapy session, but he immediately stood up, his tail wagging, quickly fitted him with his mobility cart, and rolled over to the group of children without hesitation. He went directly to first, as if sensing the boy's pain, placed his front paws on the wheelchair's armrest, and gently rested his chin on its lap. The boy's hands, which had been clenched in fists, slowly uncurled and reached for soft fur. "You're real," whispered, his voice cracking. "You're really real." His tail wagged harder. Then he did something that made every adult in the room choke back tears. He lifted his right back paw, the one that had been completely paralyzed just weeks ago, and placed it on his knee. It was a small gesture, but the symbolism was profound. "I'm like you. I understand. We're fighters together." He moved his leg, said, his eyes widening. "Mom, did you see? He just moved his back leg. They said he'd never move his legs again, but he's moving them." "Yes, baby," his mother sobbed from across the room. "He's moving them because he never gave up, because he kept fighting even when it seemed impossible." Looked into his eyes, and something shifted in the young boy's face. The anger and hopelessness that had clouded his features for months began to fade, replaced by something that had been missing: hope. "I want to try my therapy again," announced suddenly. "If can do it, I can do it too." The visit lasted 2 hours. Moved from child to child, spending time with each one, seeming to understand instinctively who needed encouragement most. 7-year-old, who had cerebral palsy and had been terrified of her standing frame, asked to try standing again because standing, so I should try too. 5-year-old David, recovering from a traumatic brain injury, laughed for the first time in 3 months when licked his face. But the most powerful moment came at the end of the visit. The children's therapists had brought old photos, the ones of him dragging himself across the street, bleeding and broken. They created a side-by-side comparison, then versus now. The children sat in a semicircle, staring at the images in silence. "That's the same dog?" asked 11-year-old Emma, who'd been born with. "That dog who was dragging himself. That's him," confirmed. 4 months ago, doctors said he'd never walk again. They said his injuries were too severe, that there was no hope, but didn't listen to what was impossible. He just kept trying, one day at a time, one step at a time. Emma wheeled closer to and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing us that doctors can be wrong about what's impossible." The video of that visit, posted by Maria that evening, went viral instantly. But this time, it was about the children he'd inspired. The caption read, "Met his biggest fans today. They came to encourage him, but he ended up encouraging them even more. This is what healing looks like." The response was overwhelming. Within 24 hours, children's hospitals from across the country were contacting the clinic, asking if could visit their patients. Rehabilitation centers wanted to incorporate his story into their therapy programs. Pet therapy organizations reached out about training other animals to provide similar inspiration. "We've created something bigger than we ever imagined," Dr. Mitchell told Maria as they watched the view count climb past 60 million. "Isn't just recovering, he's teaching us all how to recover." November brought even more remarkable progress. His harness support was reduced to 20%, then 15%, then 10%. His back legs grew stronger each day, the muscles rebuilding, the coordination improving. He could walk 50 yards before needing rest, then 75, then 100. Physical therapy sessions became events. Local news stations requested permission to film them. Universities asked to study his recovery for neurological research. Children would press against the observation window during his sessions, cheering with every step, chanting, "Go, go," like he was an athlete competing in the Olympics. And in many ways he was. was competing against medical impossibility, against statistics and prognoses and everything science said couldn't happen. And he was winning. On November 18th, 6 months after his rescue, decided to try something they'd all been secretly hopping for but were terrified to attempt: walking without the harness. The rehabilitation room was packed as always: Maria, Dr. Mitchell, James, and a small group of child patients from the hospital's latest visit. The little girl who'd witnessed first leg movements was there too, holding her father's hand tightly. Knelt beside, her hands trembling as she unbuckled the harness straps. "Okay, warrior," she whispered. "This is it. This is your moment. Everything you've worked for leads to this. Show us what you can do." The harness fell away, and for the first time in over 6 months, stood on his own 4 legs with no support whatsoever. His body swayed slightly, finding balance. His back legs trembled with the effort of bearing his full weight. For 10 seconds that felt like 10 hours, he just stood there, and everyone in the room forgot to breathe. Then took a step. Just one step, his back right leg moving forward shakily but deliberately. Then another step with his back left leg. His movements were unsteady, his coordination imperfect, but he was walking, on his own, unsupported. Screamed with joy. The other children erupted in cheers. Maria collapsed to her knees, her face buried in her hands, her entire body shaking with sobs. Stood frozen, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Mitchell grabbed James's shoulder to steady herself, both of them crying openly. Walked 5 steps before his legs began to buckle. Was there instantly to catch him, lowering him gently to the floor. But those 5 steps, those beautiful, impossible, miraculous 5 steps, had just rewritten everything anyone thought they knew about healing, about recovery, about what was possible when courage met compassion. 5 steps, Maria breathed, looking up at with wonder. You just walked 5 steps on your own. Do you understand what you just did? You did the impossible. The video posted that night wasn't just viewed, it was experienced by hundreds of millions of people around the globe. It became the most shared animal video in internet history. Major news networks led their evening broadcasts with story. The Associated Press ran a feature article. Time magazine named their most inspirational story of the year. But the real impact was quieter, more personal. In rehabilitation centers across America, therapists showed video to patients who'd lost hope. In children's hospitals, kids fighting life-threatening illnesses watched those 5 steps and found reasons to keep fighting. In homes everywhere, people facing their own impossible battles saw a dog who'd been shot, starved, paralyzed, and left to die, now walking on his own, and they whispered to themselves, "If can do it, maybe I can too." And in a small clinic in Phoenix, a brown dog with a permanent wobble in his gait and scars covering his body slept peacefully, completely unaware that he'd just become a living testament to the most powerful force in the universe: the refusal to accept defeat. December 15th arrived with unseasonably cool weather and a sky so blue it looked painted. 7 months had passed since Maria had slammed on her brakes and changed the trajectory of millions of lives by refusing to drive past a dying dog. 7 months of miracles, heartbreak, triumph, and transformation. And today was the day that would finally go home. The Phoenix Emergency Veterinary Clinic had transformed into a celebration venue. Streamers hung from the ceiling, balloons clustered in corners, and a banner stretched across the rehabilitation room reading, "CONGRATULATIONSBRUNO, welcome home." Over 300 people had gathered: medical staff, donors, volunteers, children from the hospital visits, news crews from a dozen outlets, and countless strangers who'd followed's journey from that first viral post. But the crowd wasn't why Maria's hands were shaking as she stood in the clinic's entrance. She'd made her decision months ago. The moment had looked at her with those hopeful eyes and refused to give up. She was adopting him, was coming home with her forever. Dr. Mitchell found Maria in the hallway, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Having second thoughts?" the veterinarian asked gently. No, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. I'm having every thought. What if I'm not enough for him? What if he needs more than I can give? What if? Maria, Dr. Mitchell interrupted, placing both hands on the nurse's shoulders. You saved his life. You refused to leave his side. You believed in him when medical science said there was no hope. You're not just enough, you're everything he needs. And honestly, I think he saved you too. Maria nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, because Dr. Mitchell was right, had saved her. For years, Maria had been going through the motions: work, home, bills, sleep, repeat. She'd forgotten what it felt like to fight for something, to believe in miracles, to be part of something bigger than herself. Had reminded her that life was worth living with passion and purpose. Inside the celebration room, waited with, wearing a custom bow tie that read "Adopted." His tail wagged constantly, and his back legs, those legs that had dragged lifeless for so long, shifted his weight from paw to paw in excitement. He could walk now. Not perfectly, never perfectly. His gait would always have a wobble, a hitch, a reminder of everything he'd survived. But he could walk over 30 yards unsupported, could run short distances, could play and explore and live. The ceremony began with Dr. Mitchell addressing the crowd, her voice amplified by a small microphone. 7 months ago, a dog was brought to this clinic who should have died. The injuries were too severe, the prognosis too grim, the odds too impossible. We prepared to let him go peacefully. But then something extraordinary happened. He refused to accept defeat. And in refusing, he taught all of us that the word impossible is just an opinion, not a fact. The crowd applauded, but Dr. Mitchell raised her hand for silence. Story isn't just about one dog's recovery. It's about what happens when compassion meets determination. The donations we received, over $400,000, didn't just save. Through the Second Chance Fund, we've now provided life-saving treatment to 47 animals who would have been euthanized. 47 families got to keep their beloved pets, because people around the world opened their hearts to a dog they'd never met. James stepped forward next, his animal control uniform pressed crisp for the occasion. His voice cracked as he spoke. I've been doing this job for 17 years, and I've seen things that would break your faith in humanity, but restored something in me I thought I'd lost: the belief that people are fundamentally good, that compassion still exists, that one small act of kindness can change the entire world. Maria stopped her car that day. Just stopped. And look what happened. Then it was turn. The physical therapist who'd worked with every single day stood before the microphone, tears already streaming down her face. Taught me that healing isn't always about returning to who you were before. Sometimes it's about becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who carries their scars as proof of survival rather than symbols of defeat. He'll always walk with a wobble, but that wobble is beautiful because it means he's walking at all. Finally, Maria was called forward. The crowd parted as she made her way to the front, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Dr. Mitchell handed her the leash, a simple red nylon leash that somehow felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds with the responsibility and love it represented. Maria said, kneeling down to his level. The room fell completely silent. When I found you, I thought I was saving you. But the truth is, you saved me. You reminded me what courage looks like, what hope feels like, what it means to fight even when everyone says you should quit. You've changed millions of lives around the world, but you changed mine most of all. And now, if you'll have me, I'd like to be your family forever. His response was immediate. He actually walked on those impossible legs, the 3 steps that separated them, and pressed his body against Maria's chest. His tail wagged so hard his entire back end swayed. He lifted his right back paw, the paw that had watched twitch for the first time, the paw that had been paralyzed and lifeless, and placed it in Maria's hand. A perfect handshake, a perfect promise. The room exploded in applause and tears. Flash photography lit up the space like lightning, but Maria didn't notice any of it. She wrapped her arms around and buried her face in his fur, sobbing with a joy so profound it hurt. "Welcome home," she whispered. "Welcome home, my beautiful warrior." The crowd moved toward the refreshment tables, but the most powerful moments of the day were yet to come. One by one, the children from the hospital visits approached. The 10-year-old who'd been refusing therapy rolled his wheelchair forward first. Said solemnly, "I want you to know something. Last week I stood up, with my walker, but I stood up. For the first time since my accident I stood up, and I did it because of you. My therapist said I wouldn't be able to for at least another 6 months, but I didn't care what she said. You taught me that doctors don't know everything, that you can do impossible things if you just keep trying." Walked to and repeated his signature gesture, placing his paw on the boy's lap. Took the paw in both hands, holding it like a sacred gift, tears rolling down his young face. The gesture repeated with every child. Went to each one, spending time, offering comfort, creating moments that would be remembered for lifetimes. Parents stood back, filming on their phones, watching their children gain strength from a dog who'd survived the unsurvivable. As the celebration wound down and people began to leave, the 8-year-old whose belief had sparked first movement approached Maria shyly. She held a large envelope decorated with crayon drawings of dogs. "This is for," said quietly. "It's from my class. We all wrote him letters and drew pictures. We wanted him to know that he's our hero." Maria opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were dozens of letters and drawings from children, each one more touching than the last. "Dear, you taught me to never give up on my dreams. Thank you for showing me that being different is okay. You're the bravest dog in the whole world. I was sad every day until I saw your videos. Now I'm happy again." "He touches so many lives," his father said, his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "We drove 2 hours here today because insisted. She said she needed to say goodbye to before he went to his new home." Knelt down and hugged fiercely. "Thank you for teaching me that miracles are real," she whispered into his fur. "I'll never forget you." As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the clinic's windows, Maria loaded into her car. The back seat was equipped with a special orthopedic bed, toys, and everything a dog could need. Climbed in, using his own legs, taking his time, wobbling but determined, and settled onto his bed with a contented sigh. Dr. Mitchell knocked on the car window before Maria could pull away. "I need you to know something," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "In my 23 years as a veterinarian, I've saved a lot of lives, but he saved mine too. He reminded me why I went into this field, why I fight so hard for every patient, why this work matters. Tell him thank you for me. Tell him every single day." Maria nodded, unable to speak. She started the car and began the drive to her home, with her phone buzzing constantly with notifications. The video of the adoption ceremony was already going viral, already being shared millions of times, already inspiring another wave of hope across the world. But Maria silenced her phone. This moment wasn't about the millions of followers or the viral videos or the media attention. This was about a nurse and a dog who'd found each other on the worst day of both their lives and had somehow created something beautiful from unimaginable pain. When they arrived at Maria's house, her teenage daughter Sophia was waiting on the porch, tears already streaming down her face. She'd been following his journey from the beginning, had donated her babysitting money to his fund, had begged her mother to adopt him. Walked up the front steps slowly, pausing halfway to rest. But he made it. He walked into his forever home on his own 4 legs, tail wagging, ready to begin the next chapter of his extraordinary life. That night, as slept peacefully on his new bed beside Maria's own, she posted one final update to the millions of people who'd been following his journey. "Is home. He's safe. He's loved. He's proven that miracles exist. Thank you for believing in him, for donating, for sharing his story, for opening your hearts. Taught us that it doesn't matter how you start, it matters how you fight. And this warrior fought harder than anyone I've ever known. His story doesn't end here, it's just beginning." Because every day he wakes up and chooses to keep going is another day, he inspires millions to do the same. From the bottom of our hearts, Thank you for being part of his miracle. The post received 14 million likes and 800,000 comments within 12 hours. But the most important response came from a rehabilitation center in Boston, where a veteran who'd lost both legs in combat read Maria's words and made a decision. He called his therapist and said 5 words that would change his life. "I'm ready to try again." And in a quiet house in Phoenix, a brown dog with scars and a wobble and the biggest heart in the world slept peacefully, finally home, finally safe, finally loved, completely unaware that his refusal to give up had given millions of strangers around the world permission to keep fighting their own battles, to keep hopping for their own miracles, to keep believing that love and determination could overcome anything. Story had started with a desperate crawl across burning pavement, begging for help. It had ended with him walking into his forever home on his own 4 legs, teaching the world that the distance between impossible and inevitable is measured not in logic or science or statistics, but in heart, hope, and the courage to take one more step, even when everyone says you can't.